IELTS Speaking Part 1. Broken Promises. Question 1. Have you ever broken a promise? Model answer. Band 6 answer. Yes, I have broken a promise before. It was usually something small, like promising to meet a friend but then getting too busy. I felt a bit bad, but sometimes it was hard to avoid. Band 7 answer. Yes, I have broken a promise in the past, mostly because of unexpected situations. For example, I once promised to meet a friend, but I had to cancel because of work. I felt sorry about it and tried to explain honestly. Band 8 answer. Yes, I have broken a promise before, usually due to unexpected responsibilities. For instance, I once promised to meet a friend, but work suddenly became overwhelming. I felt guilty, so I explained the situation clearly and made sure to reschedule, because I think honesty is important when a promise is broken. Question 2. How do you usually feel when someone breaks a promise to you? Model answer. Band 6 answer. I usually feel disappointed when someone breaks a promise. If it happens often, I may stop trusting that person. Band 7 answer. I usually feel disappointed, especially if the promise was important to me. However, I try to understand the reason. If the person explains properly, I can accept it more easily. Band 8 answer. I usually feel disappointed at first, particularly if I had high expectations. That said, I also consider the reason behind it. In my experience, when someone explains sincerely, it helps maintain trust, which is something people value strongly in relationships, especially in Japan. Question 3. Do you think it is important to always keep promises? Model answer. Band 6 answer. Yes, I think it is important to keep promises. Keeping promises helps people trust each other. Band 7 answer. Yes, I believe keeping promises is very important because it shows responsibility. When people keep their promises, relationships become more stable, both in personal life and at work. Band 8 answer. Yes, I strongly believe that keeping promises is essential, as it reflects reliability and respect. In many cultures, including Japan, keeping one's word is closely linked to personal integrity. Even small promises can affect how trustworthy a person is seen to be. Question 4. What do people usually do when they break a promise? Model answer. Band 6 answer. People usually apologize when they break a promise. Some people also try to explain why it happened. Band 7 answer. When people break a promise, they often apologize and give a reason. Some may try to make up for it by arranging another time or doing something helpful. Band 8 answer. When people break a promise, they usually apologize and explain the situation. In my experience, especially in Japan, People often try to take responsibility by offering a clear explanation and making an effort to repair the situation, such as rescheduling or compensating in some way. IELTS Speaking Part 2. A broken promise. Describe a time when you broke a promise. You should say what the promise was, who you made the promise to, what happened that made you break it, and explain how you felt about breaking the promise. You have 1 minute to prepare. You have 2 minutes to talk. Model answer. Band 6 answer. I'd like to talk about a time when I broke a promise to my friend. The promise was that I would help her prepare for an important presentation at school. We had planned to meet after class so that I could listen to her practice and give her some feedback. However, on that day, I was extremely tired because I had stayed up late the night before finishing my homework. After school, I started to feel unwell and had a headache, so I decided to go home instead of meeting her. I sent her a message to explain the situation, but it was already quite late. I felt really bad about breaking the promise because I knew the presentation was important to her. Even though she said she understood, I still felt guilty and disappointed in myself. This experience taught me that I should be more careful before making promises. Band 7 answer. I'd like to describe a time when I broke a promise to a close friend of mine. I had promised to help her practice for a school presentation, which was quite important because she felt nervous about speaking in front of others. We agreed to meet after school and go through her slides together. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. The night before, I had stayed up very late studying for an exam, and the next day I felt exhausted and unwell. After school, I realized that I wouldn't be able to concentrate properly, so I decided to cancel our plan and go home to rest. I explained everything to her through a message. Although she told me it was okay, I still felt uncomfortable about the situation. I felt guilty because I didn't keep my word, and I worried that I had let her down. This experience made me realize that keeping a promise is not only about good intentions, but also about managing my time and energy better. Band 8 answer. I'd like to talk about a time when I broke a promise, which is something I still remember quite clearly. I had promised to help a close friend of mine prepare for an important school presentation. She was anxious about public speaking, so she was really counting on my support. We planned to meet after school and rehearse together. However, the situation changed unexpectedly. The night before our meeting, I stayed up very late preparing for an exam, and the lack of sleep affected me more than I expected. By the time school ended the next day, I had a bad headache and felt completely drained. I realized that if I forced myself to meet her, I wouldn't be much help, so I made the difficult decision to cancel and explain honestly what had happened. Emotionally, I felt quite conflicted. On one hand, I knew I had a valid reason, but on the other hand, I felt guilty for not keeping my promise. Even though my friend was understanding, I still felt responsible for disappointing her. This experience taught me that making a promise also means understanding my own limits, and that honesty and communication are essential when things don't go as planned. IELTS Speaking Part 3. A Broken Promise. Question 1. Why do people sometimes break promises? Model answer. Band 6 answer. I think people sometimes break promises because unexpected things happen. For example, they may become too busy or feel too tired to do what they promised. In some cases, people don't plan their time well, so they realize later that they cannot keep their promise. Another reason is that some promises are made too quickly. People may agree to something without thinking carefully, and later they find it difficult to follow through. Band 7 answer. In my opinion, people often break promises because of poor planning or changes in circumstances. For instance, someone may promise to help a friend, but later they become overwhelmed by work or study pressure and simply don't have enough energy or time. Another important reason is that people sometimes make promises based on good intentions rather than realistic conditions. At the moment they agree, they want to be kind or supportive, but they fail to consider their own limits, which makes breaking the promise more likely. Band 8 answer. I believe people break promises mainly because there is a gap between intention and reality. When people make a promise, they often focus on how they want to be seen, as reliable or supportive, rather than whether they can realistically keep it. Once unexpected pressure, such as work deadlines or health issues, appears, the promise becomes difficult to maintain. In addition, modern life encourages overcommitment. People tend to say yes to too many things, especially in social or professional settings, and as a result, some promises are sacrificed when priorities change. This shows that breaking a promise is often less about dishonesty and more about poor self-awareness and decision-making. Question 2. Is breaking a promise always a bad thing? Model answer. Band 6 answer. I don't think breaking a promise is always bad. Sometimes people have good reasons, such as getting sick or facing an emergency. In these situations, breaking a promise may be unavoidable. However, if someone breaks promises too often, it can cause problems in relationships because others may stop trusting them. Band 7 answer. I wouldn't say breaking a promise is always negative. In some cases, it may be the more responsible choice. For example, if someone is too exhausted or unwell, forcing themselves to keep a promise might lead to worse results. That said, the key issue is how the situation is handled. If a person explains the reason clearly and shows responsibility, the damage can be reduced. But repeatedly breaking promises without explanation can seriously harm trust. Band 8 answer. I think whether breaking a promise is bad depends largely on the context and the person's attitude. In certain situations, such as health issues or unexpected responsibilities, breaking a promise may actually reflect maturity, especially if keeping it would cause harm or poor outcomes. However, what truly matters is accountability. If someone communicates honestly, apologizes sincerely, and tries to make up for it, the promise breaking becomes understandable. On the other hand, treating promises casually or avoiding responsibility can gradually weaken personal credibility and long-term relationships. Question 3. How does breaking promises affect trust in relationships? Model answer. Band 6 answer. Breaking promises can reduce trust between people. When someone doesn't keep their word, others may feel disappointed or hurt. Over time, they may stop relying on that person. Trust is important in friendships and families, so breaking promises can make relationships weaker. Band 7 answer. Breaking promises often has a direct impact on trust, especially if it happens repeatedly. Even small promises, when broken often, can make people feel insecure or unimportant. However, trust is not destroyed instantly. If the person shows regret and tries to change their behavior, the relationship may recover. Trust depends not only on actions, but also on how people respond to mistakes. Band 8 answer. Trust is built on consistency, so breaking promises can seriously damage relationships over time. Each broken promise sends a message that the person may not be reliable, which makes others hesitant to depend on them emotionally or practically. That said, trust is also shaped by patterns rather than single events. A one-time mistake, followed by honesty and effort to improve, may not cause lasting harm. In contrast, repeated broken promises can slowly erode trust, even if each individual incident seems minor. Question 4. What can parents or schools do to teach children the importance of keeping promises? Model answer. Band 6 answer. Parents and schools can teach children to keep promises by setting a good example. If adults keep their own promises, children are more likely to learn from them. They can also explain why promises are important and how breaking them can hurt others. Band 7 Answer. I think the most effective way is through daily behavior rather than lectures. When parents and teachers consistently keep their word, children naturally understand that promises matter. In addition, children should be given small responsibilities. If they fail to keep a promise, adults can guide them to reflect on the consequences and encourage them to take responsibility instead of simply punishing them. Band 8 Answer. In my view, teaching children about promises requires both modeling and reflection. Adults need to demonstrate reliability in everyday situations, because children learn values mainly through observation rather than instruction. At the same time, when children break a promise, it should be treated as a learning opportunity. Instead of focusing only on blame, parents and schools can help children understand how their actions affect others and guide them toward repairing trust. This approach helps children develop accountability and emotional awareness, which are essential for long-term character development.
Congrats on making it to the end of this video, and kudos to you if you did all that practice. You are amazing. If you have any questions, feel free to comment down below. And you can also add my official LINE account that's in the profile. And if you do this, then I can send you a free phrases guide that you can use for your practice. All right, happy studying. See ya.